So the topics we will be seeing now are related to the real world scenario. We know increasingly the biomedical systems have a very complex behavior. So some of the filtering approaches and the learning approaches that we have seen have to be modified and adapted to the reality. So that's where I think the biggest opportunity and the challenges are with regards to analyzing biomedical signals. So the topic could be titled as, we would be designing adaptive systems. By adaptive systems, it's similar to what we have seen before, designing digital systems, which could enable us in two main aspects of any information processing that are filtering and learning. So we will see how the systems could be meant for filtering and also to some extent in learning in the real world context. The approach we take will have two major focuses. They're essentially driven by data. In other words, the system we develop are data-driven approaches or approaches that are based on the signals we have collected. And it could also be seen from the observations of the signals that we have. Can we develop a reliable mathematical model? And this model allows us to understand the system better and also to proceed with what we call robust feature extraction. In other words, features that will be applicable in the real world context of physiological signals. So this would be some shift from what we have learned so far. We know how to remove things which are clearly obvious, how to remove power line interference, instrumentation noise, motion artifact noise, and so forth by using fixed filtering. And we have gone through various techniques for that. But physiological signals are much more complex. Some of these noises are okay, but we have to take an additional level of investigation. It could mean that one physiological signal would interfere with another physiological signal. And in that particular case, it goes beyond some of the fixed filtering approaches we have seen. So what is the type of mathematics we need to consider here? Just a good understanding of the foundations of the statistical knowledge would help you in this particular topic. When we talk about statistical knowledge, what we mean to say is that the biomedical signal, which is discretized and digitized X of n, has a random behavior. Previously, we have only seen this random behavior with regards to noise, but physiological signals also have some kind of a stochastic nature or randomness associated with that. That comes due to the various chemical, mechanical, and electrical mechanisms that are happening within the human body, introduces those physiological variations, which could be seen mathematically as a random behavior. While we go through the random processes, it's a topic by itself. What needs to be kept in mind for this particular topic would be the expectation operator. So the E operator, expectation operator, E operator is also known as the ensemble operator. Ensemble operator, basically it means here the mathematics should be designed on a collection of signals, and those collection of signals will provide, rather than an absolute mathematical description of the signal, we will provide the statistical quantities of those signal. Okay, so what do I mean by that? instead of designing a system based on only one ECG, we try to have as many ECGs as possible, and we would derive statistical properties from those ECGs, and we would be basing our system design on those statistical variables. Okay, that ensemble operator or the expectation operator really does a great job when we have infinite collection of any signals. We all appreciate practically it's not possible. So we need to have a decent collection of signals which could give a meaningful estimate of the mean and the variance, the two important statistical variables. Now, the mean of the random process X could be denoted as expectation of X. Okay, so I want to make sure you understand the expectation operator X. It's not a function of X. It just means it's an expectation operator on the random variable X. Okay, so it's not a function of X. It's an expectation operator on X. So E of X could be said as the mean of a random process. And the mean of the random process is computed by this formula, which is summation formula where it's Xn is multiplied by P of n. The P of n is the discrete probability density function. Okay, P of n is a discrete probability density function. Probability density function is typically a plot of how the random process changes. Like, for example, if I take the distribution of the marks of midterm, then typically any marks tend to have a normal distribution or a Gaussian distribution. So the shape of the PDFs in a normal circumstance tends to take this normal distribution. Okay. You could also have like a tossing a coin, for example, has an equal probability. In that case, we call the probability density function as uniform PDF. So the idea of the PDFs is that no matter what is the shape, the area under the PDF is 1. Okay, so that's similar to adding. The probabilities and probability should add up to 1. Okay, so whether it's a uniform PDF or a Gaussian or a normal, the name Gaussian or normal is interchangeably used. The area under the PDF is 1. So once we know the probability density function of this random signal X, then we plug in that Pn into that expression to give a mean. So this mean E of X is no more the regular mean which we have seen before. It's a statistical mean. Yes, it might become the typical mean we have seen before. If your P of n is uniformly distributed, in this case, P of n will become 1 over n. If the P of n is 1 over n, then that expression E of X is nothing but the classical mean that we have seen before, where we add the values and divide by n. Okay, but it's not guaranteed in many biomedical signals that the probability density function PDF of a given random variable is uniform. It tends to have any other shapes. The other common shape is this Gaussian distribution, or it's also called normal distribution. Okay, so keep that in mind. So we are assuming it's a general case and putting the P in there. So that expression E of X is giving the statistical mean, and we normally call it's a first order operation. Okay, first order statistical variable, and it's a powerful way to represent the entire random process just by using one value, which is the mean. One step further is what's called the second central moment of the random process X. Second central moment of the random process X is nothing given by E of X minus M the whole square, expectation of X minus M the whole square. It's an expectation operator again, and mathematically it's written using this formula, n going from 1 to uppercase n, xn minus m square probability density function PDF. Now the mean m is given by the previous formula, so it's some form of a second order random variable, or a second order statistical second order quantity. Okay, so a random process xn could be denoted by this m, which is a mean, and also the second central moment. If you see the second central moment, it's a kind of a measurement of how much of your random variable is deviating or dispersed from the mean. So it's some kind of a variance metric. Okay, it's some kind of standard deviation and variance metric. So again, these are all both statistical means and statistical variances that we are talking here. Okay, so in a specific case, when the mean is 0, then obviously we can get the variance of that random process. Okay, mean is 0. Okay, even otherwise we just call it a second central moment, but a variance is a very specific case of the second central moment where we assume the mean to be 0. A mean and variance are adequate in determining most of the random behavior of biomedical signals. Okay, you don't have to go through higher order statistics, like you don't have to worry about third order, fourth order, and so forth. The first order and second order makes a lot of sense in a statistical concept. Now, why it also makes sense is physically we know the mean of a signal is nothing but the DC value, the average value or the DC value of the signal. And the second order variance is nothing but the power of the signal. So a signal is easily denoted through this physical variables of mean, the DC value, and also the power value. Okay, so that's why it's most commonly used statistical variables in analyzing biomedical signal. Now, some specific cases around that is that if I take the expectation operator xn plus k, again, it's very simple. When you're denoting mathematically, the summation behaves like this. It's again based on the probability density function. It's similar to what you have seen before. Autocorrelation you have seen before, but what was missing was the PDF descriptor. But given we are assuming xn to be a random process, now this is a statistical autocorrelation function. Okay, Rxxk is statistical autocorrelation function. And here also you can see specifically when k equal to 0 in the autocorrelation function, it leads to a special case where you're computing the variance of the signal when k equal to 0. Okay, and Rxxk, the autocorrelation function, has very interesting properties. It's an even function with even distribution around the origin, and it tends to decay with k. Okay, so in other words, if I plot the autocorrelation function in most application, it tends to have a shape like this, and this is a point where k equal to 0, and that's a point again that gives the variance of the signal. When k equal to 1, yes, you get a value, but that's lower than what you would have got with k equal to 0. K equal to 1 essentially indicates that you have shifted the signal by 1 unit to the right and so forth. So if you also see here, I am giving you the discrete expressions of these statistical parameters. You can also get the continuous time expressions if you want. The only substitution that is it's replaced by integrals. Okay, so some books tend to cover only the continuous domain operator, but here I'm saying giving you the discrete domain equivalent of that. Similar to the autocorrelation value, we can also get the cross correlation between two different random processes or two different physiological signals through this mathematical expression. It's a simple extension of that. Similar to your cross correlation that you have computed before, the difference here is that you have the PDF involved. So estimation of the probability density function of the random variable becomes so important when you wanted to compute these statistical parameters. Okay, and any statistical thing, it does a good job when you have a large collection of signals. So the larger the collection of the signals, the better the estimate of the PDF. Okay. Now, the two spin-offs from this concept is that we can say that the process is uncorrelated. If the process is uncorrelated, if two signals are uncorrelated, then the expectation operator E of x and yn is nothing but E of x and times E of yn. Okay, so you can separate them and it becomes basically the mean of those two random variables multiplied with each other. Okay, that's uncorrelation. Okay, again, a simple extension of that, but it has a huge implication when we come into the part of designing adaptive systems. Now, you call two random processes or two signals as orthogonal to each other when this cross correlation or uncorrelation value is equal to 0. Okay, important point to keep in mind. Orthogonality has a lot of interesting properties in signal processing. And if you look into even the Fourier basis function, which are made up of sine omega, cos omega, they have orthogonal behavior. Orthogonal behavior brings a lot of things in terms of understanding the signal properties. And it basically means one process is totally independent of the other process. They're at a 19-degree angle to each other, 90-degree, totally orthogonal to each other. Okay, so in a nutshell, this one page summarizes the various definitions around statistical aspects of it. Okay, so we have looked into mean, we have looked into second central movement. So this is a mean, there's a second central movement, and then we looked into variance as a special case of second central movement. Then we can go one step further, get RXXK, which is autocorrelation values, cross correlation values. Processes are uncorrelated to each other, and processes are orthogonal to each other. Okay, so in all those expressions, the key factor is P of n, the probability density function that we have been talking, and that's where your statistical knowledge comes in very handy. Okay, now you might be wondering, if that's the case, now how would we really go about in getting P of n? Okay. So I have given some explanation here, which you can go through the notes. The question mark comes, how do we estimate PDF when we don't really have large of collection of signals with us? Okay, it's an unmet challenge. Still a lot of work needs to be done, because we normally have only a small collection of signals, so you may not get a reliable estimate of the PDF. So any of the statistical variables we just talked in the previous page becomes quite an approximate version of it. Okay, thank God we have a solution for that. The solution is that it happens that most of the processes in biomedical signal tend to have this very interesting statistical property called ergodicity. Ergodicity, okay? Ergodicity is a process where it says it's okay in biomedical signals that you don't have to do an ensemble averaging, like you don't have to collect many of those signals and do an averaging E operator, expectation operator like that. Okay, you could also do an operation like this, okay, in the more like the horizontal direction. So rather than averaging along the vertical direction where you need to have a large collection of those signals, better is that if you have infinite collection of that, then the E estimate is perfect, okay? Estimate of E is perfect. But we understood that it's time consuming. We may not have the resources to do that. Then what's the way around is that we could even do the averaging by taking one instant of the signal and proceeding with the averaging in this horizontal direction. Now, this kind of rings a bell to the previous lab experiments you've done, where the idea was synchronized averaging and moving average. In synchronized averaging, you have to align the signals together and do the averaging. In a moving average, you basically go in the signal in the horizontal direction and you do the averaging, okay? So this kind of a moving average that you did, an ensemble average, if the process is ergodic, it means both are same. There you go. Very, very interesting statistical kind of a significance here, saying that if it's okay in just averaging in one episode along the horizontal direction is equivalent to averaging along this vertical direction, which is ensemble operator, then you are saving incredible amount of time and resources. So fortunately, most of the biomedicals tends to have this ergodic behavior, and that ergodicity has allowed us to really not to worry about including P of n in our calculations. So what I mean to say is that I could even compute the autocorrelation like this without including the P of n. So there's no PDF involved. PDF is not in that expression, okay? So again, this is just another form of autocorrelation. I could have easily said Rxxk is equal to Xn and Xn minus K. But I just wanted to show that if you have two lags K and M, then that's another way to denote the autocorrelation. Both are same. But the only difference between what we saw before with the statistical autocorrelation and this regular form of autocorrelation is the absence of the PDF function, because it indicates in many processes it's ergodic behavior. So not to worry about taking a statistical average. We are good in even taking the regular means of proceeding with autocorrelation function. So with the same spirit, it also applies in the computation of the cross correlation, where you don't have the PDF present. Okay, so that's really, really helpful. And you could imagine this property is coming in very handy for us, that I don't have to worry in collecting all my ECGs to come with a statistical average. It's enough if I collect one ECG, one representative ECG, I could achieve similar results. Okay, I am not going to get into a lot of details about understanding ergodicity and the random processes. You're free to dig into the details of it, but it happens that we are saved by this nice ergodic property, which allows us to proceed with fewer samples in designing our adaptive systems. Okay, so this is in a nutshell a summary of the statistics and how statistics could be bypassed by using certain interesting behavior and properties. Okay, so keep in mind the definition of autocorrelation, cross correlation. They will be used quite frequently in the design of adaptive systems. In the filtering process, just like how we have designed a lot of things based on convolution, and you very much appreciate the difference between convolution and correlation. In one of them, we flip and we slide it across the signal. That's what convolution is about. We take two sequences, one of the sequences gets flipped and we slide it across. In a correlation, we don't flip, we just slide one sequence over the other. Okay, that's a very minor difference between the two things, but convolution is a natural operation of any filtering, whereas correlation is typically done for understanding the behavior and the characteristics and to find how much of a signal matches with the other signal which we are interested in. Okay, so with that idea in mind, we will now shift into how to design adaptive filters. Very, very interesting topic. And adaptive filters are essentially filters which are going to be applied in a complex situation. You will get to know what the complex situation we are referring to. So here, I am not sure what frequency I need to remove. Okay, I don't know whether I need to use a band stop or a band pass or a notch filter or a difference filter or a moving average. I don't know any of those things. In other words, I don't know what's the behavior of the interference. All I know is that I might want to have the signal to behave in a certain way. In other words, I know my desired response. Okay, DN, desired response. Okay, how it works is that similar to the previous thing, like we have seen a signal XN getting into a filter. Again, the filter, whichever we are talking in this course, are all digital filters. And all those filters are assumed to be LTI filters, okay, linear time invariant filters, and they're all digital filters. So same thing which you have seen before applies here. So this filter, obviously being an LTI filter, the input XN will get convolved with the filter's impulse response to give you the output YN. Okay. The only difference is that rather than using H, we were using the variable H to denote the impulse response of the filter. In the adaptive filter, I'm going to be changing into W. Both mean the same, okay? But just the notation is changed to differentiate from the fixed filter's impulse response to an adaptive filter's impulse response, which happens to be W in this case. So essentially what happens is that the output Y is a convolution, a linear convolution of the filter coefficients W with regards to the input. Now, in design of the adaptive filter, unlike the previous filter designs, which normally has been borrowed from analog domain, as you very well know, we have used things like bilinear Z transform, impulse invariant method, which are all concepts to take a a filter from H of S domain, Laplace domain, to the digital domain by using those transforms. In the adaptive filter design, the criteria we use is the error function, and I will get into the details of that, okay? So essentially, in this thing, there are 4 variables to keep in mind. Xn is the noisy signal. Let's assume the noisy signal is a complex noisy signal. In other words, the interference is overlapping too much with the signal of interest. So that's your input Xn. We assume the output Yn that's coming out of the filter has a different behavior according to the criteria we want. And essentially, we want the Yn, the filter output, to be as close as to the desired response. Okay, so we want Yn to be as close to the desired response that we give. Then obviously, the idea that we would be using is that the error function would be used as a criteria to control your filter coefficients W. So this way, I keep iterating those coefficients in a way my Yn becomes close to Dn, or in other words, Dn minus Yn, which is the difference, becomes 0, or error becomes 0. Okay, so if you see, I can bring a parallelism in the concept of machine learning. So this is similar to the training that's done in machine learning, where the desired response is something like a pattern that I wanted my system to give. Pattern recognition problems, I want for example, my system to recognize the dogs, okay, dogs in an image, for example. So I would be giving my desired response to be all dog images in a way that the filter gets, or the machine learning model gets adapted. So the output Yn, once the error becomes 0, is always giving me the dog recognition output, okay? So it's similar to the training stage in ML. So what happens in an adaptive filter is that once we have trained our W, we say the W are trained when we have the desired response and the Yn very close, or in other words, the difference is 0 or almost 0. That's when we call the filter has been trained. Then after that, we don't use the desired response anymore. We don't use the estimation error anymore. The filter weights W are frozen, and now you have designed your adaptive filter. Now, any new signal that's getting into the system, for example, Xn, will be automatically filtered to give the output that we are expecting. Okay, so that's how it works in an adaptive filter. But the difference now is that the major difference is that the filter coefficients W are being trained and learned. Okay, so there's a learning that's happening. So you see, this is where, I kept saying before, the proper design of H allowed you to get a nice filtering going on. Now, a proper design of W will allow you to get a nice learned model, which will make us give the output that we look for. Okay, so very, very interesting connection between these two topics. And now going into that, now how do we, the whole objective in this filter design problem, and as I said, you could also get the parallelism in machine learning problem. How do we really make En 0, or how do we minimize En? Okay, so there are many ways to do that. One is taking the mean square value of the estimation error. So I take the estimation error E square n, and I take the mean squared value, or the averaged value of this E square n. Why we take average? Because I would be sending many samples of Xn through this filter, and I would take the average of that. So that's approach A. And the second approach is just take the absolute value of the estimation error. Okay, so in other words, absolute value of E of n. Okay, we can try to minimize it. So either you minimize this mean squared error, or when I put the downward arrow, it means minimizing. An ideal minimization is the value has become 0. That's an ideal minimization. Or you minimize the absolute error difference. You could also take the third order. In other words, we can look into E cube n if you want, and try to minimize it. Okay. Among the 3 choices we have, either to take the squared, or the absolute, or the cube, you would have so far realized that people always prefer the first approach. Okay, the first approach, so option A as a preferred thing, because as I've written, it has a clear advantage over the other two methods because it's easy to apply mathematics on this E square n, and the optimization is tractable. Okay, the optimization is something that we can control easily in E square. So this is also called least squares approach. Okay, least squares approach or mean squared error approach. Okay, so you would have come across in many of the machine learning ideas as well, something called least squares or mean squared error optimization. So the both mean the same. Its simple thing is that they are based on a squared quantity, and it has been shown easy to run the mathematics on this thing and also easy to grasp the concept. Whereas when you work on the first order, you may not be very familiar with the surface that we have in the optimization plane, and it's not easy to design also good algorithms which give stability while trying to converge, and anything higher order is even more complex. So least squares and mean squared error are common approaches to minimize the error so that we can get the optimal performance. So what happens is that now we go back to our familiar filter structure. So previously I have used the block diagram here, the block diagram approach that you saw, xn going in, and this block diagram approach. I'm just going to expand into real filter realization, which you already seen before, how to realize digital filters. So in this filter realization, this xn input is going into the filter, and obviously the filter is nothing but made up of delay and multiplier elements. The elements are multiplied by these coefficients W0, W1, W2, Wm minus 1. So you can see the order of this filter is m because there are m coefficients. So the order of the filter is m. And as I indicated before, I've replaced the value h with a w because these coefficients are going to be learned in an adaptive way. Now, the yn is the output, xn is the input. Now you have the desired response, which you supply in the training stage or in the learning stage of the process. And we have the error function, okay? So obviously in the learning stage, this error criteria would play a role in controlling your weights. The weights are going to be iteratively adapted in a way when the error is optimized. So when error becomes minimum or it's zero or optimized, then any further update on the W will make no difference. So in that way, we have said the W has reached a steady state. In other words, the filter has converged. In other words, we have trained the system. Okay. Okay, so that's the optimization process. Now, how does it look mathematically? Very, very easy. Okay, don't be intimidated by the different mathematical notations here. It's a very simple thing if you pay attention to it. Okay, we know the output of this filter is nothing but the convolutional sum. Okay, convolution between the filter coefficients W and the input X. Okay, some people even call this filter coefficients W as a tap weights. Okay, W is also called filter coefficients or tap weights. Some people use a very simplified version called tap or weight vector. Okay, filter coefficients, tap weights, they all mean the same thing. So essentially here we are looking for the optimal W vector. Okay, the weight vector or the filter coefficients here. We know the error is nothing but the difference of the desired response to the output of the filter. Now we have decided how to optimize error. The best way is to go with the least squares optimization. So mean squared error optimization is what we need. So this is the expression that we have. It makes it easy. We know what's E of n. So when I plug in that value here, it becomes dn minus yn the whole square. Now going one step further, we know what's y of n. So we know this is y of n. So when I plug into that expression, you get this detailed formula here, okay? Now, if you look into this metric, the y of n is nothing but the convolution of the filter weights with the input. Now the error, which was E square n, has become taken this notation. Okay, has taken this notation error function. So now we need to optimize this error function. It happens this error function, if you look closely, is basically a quadratic component, because we know y equal to x squared. It typically means it's quadratic. So behavior is quadratic. In other words, it looks like an inverted bowl. Okay, so it's a bowl-shaped convex surface. Now, in this convex surface, which is what your error function is, because it's E is equal to E square n, will lead to something like that. If you see this performance surface, it's guaranteed to have a minima at this point. This is a minimum where error is minimum. Error is minimum. Okay, this minimum error is what we are looking at. Okay, is what we are seeking at. So how does it work? Mathematically speaking, when we look for the minima, local minima, when we do the differential operator, dy by dx, going back to the basic linear algebra, dy by dx gives either the maxima or the minima point. Okay. Now, given this surface has only minimum, doing a first differential operator, dy by dx is guaranteed to give this point, the minimal point. So our whole idea is to find this sweet spot, is to reach this red point, because the red point is where my error is minimum and my filters have been optimized. So mathematically speaking, that performance index is nothing but taking dy by dx, but here it's not a scalar. The quantity that we have is a vector quantity. So we call this as a gradient. Okay, so this is a gradient operation. So it's not dy by dx. Dy by dx is for scalar. The same when you apply on a vector is called a gradient. So here, instead of saying dy by dx is equal to 0, we take the partial derivative of the error function with regards to the tap weight vector, and we have m of those tap weight vector. So this becomes the performance index now. Okay, so simple thing. Now all we have to do is we have to do a partial differentiation of this function with respect to each of the tap weight vector. Okay, so this expression has to be partially differentiated with each of the tap weight vector. When we do that, eventually we find that, so this is applying that partial differentiation operator. We get these two expressions by the partial differentiation operator. Then finally we see that when you look into this expression, it essentially has two elements attached to it. So this expression, when we do the partial differentiation, has Wm, and it has this quantity and the second quantity. So when you look closely into this xn minus m, xn minus k operator, we know from our definition, this is nothing but the autocorrelation value of the signal. Okay, so you have the autocorrelation value. When you look into the second quantity, it's a cross correlation of d with x. So what has happened is that expression that we had with regards to partial differentiation has turned into an optimization problem, and that leads to this expression where tap weight vector Wm is multiplied by the autocorrelation function is equal to the cross correlation of the signal with the desired response. Okay, so this expression is important because if I solve this equation, these m equations, because I will have m by m equations. If I take the range of m and k, I will have an m by m equation. If I solve this equation, then I will get my w, and the optimal weights are given to you. Okay, so now let's look one step further. This equation is also known as the Wiener-Hopf equation. But as I said, I could convert this algebraic equation into a matrix form. And by matrix form, I mean I'm converting all those representation into matrix form, and looking into the matrix form very closely, I can take the vector of the signal xn, which is nothing but an m by 1 vector. It means it's a signal xn and the past m minus 1 samples. I can also take the vector of the weight. In other words, the filter coefficients, it's also an m by 1 filter coefficients, which is nothing but w. Then the same convolution sum we showed before could be expressed in this mathematical matrix notation by as y of n is nothing but the vector W transpose times the xn vector. Okay, so there should be a vector sign here. Yeah, W transpose xn. That's another way to represent the convolution sum. Cross correlation value, which we just determined, could also be put in a matrix form. So all I'm doing is that all those previous algebraic equations, I'm putting into the matrix form. So the cross correlation, we had R dx k. So now I can go through that. So this is a cross correlation vector. Okay. In other words, the vector P is a cross correlation vector, which is nothing but based on R dx, which we just saw in the previous slide here. Okay. So if you see here, I'm basically converting this in this form into also a matrix form, and I will also convert Rxx, the autocorrelation, to matrix form. So all those things which are algebraic, when we convert into matrix form, you will see it is easy to understand and also easy to implement in certain programming languages like MATLAB. So as indicated, so that's P was a cross correlation matrix based on Rdx. Now the input autocorrelation matrix, which I just showed, has become an M by M matrix, and that is called the R matrix. Okay, so the previous Wiener-Hopf equation which we had now could be converted into the matrix representation, and that matrix representation leads us to what's called RW equal to P. By the way, if I use underscore or if I use a superscript arrow, it all means the particular quantity is not a scalar quantity. Either it's a matrix or it's a vector. Okay. So here, that entire Wiener-Hopf algebraic equation we had, which was essentially this algebraic equation we had, has been put into a matrix form in the form of RW equal to P. Okay, RW equal to P. So this is the final expression that we need, because now all I do is that I compute the W by taking R inverse P. Okay, so the weight vector, that filter which we want to design at the end of the design of any filter, is finding its filter coefficients, or the tap weight vector in this specific case happens to be W. So W is nothing but R inverse P matrix, inverse of R matrix times P matrix. Great. So all you have to know in designing this filter are the signal X, its autocorrelation value, and its cross correlation with the desired response. Okay. Very, very simple. It doesn't have to rely on any other formation. No need to think about what would be the passband frequency, cutoff frequency, stop band, nothing like that. Simply on the basis of the signal's properties. To be specific, on the signal statistical properties, but interestingly, we found the statistical properties matches to the deterministic properties we saw, which is autocorrelation, cross correlation. So the W determination of the tap weight vector is now based on R matrix, R inverse P, R matrix, autocorrelation matrix of the signal with itself, and the cross correlation matrix of the signal with the desired response. So this brings the point, because the P matrix is the cross correlation between the input X and the desired response. If that cross correlation is 0, which means they're totally uncorrelated and orthogonal, then the tap weight vectors are 0. It gives an idea that you cannot expect the filter to do magic. Okay, so going back into the previous example of the dog image, because it's easy to understand images. So if you want your desired response to be having a dog as the desired response, the DN to be dog images, I am going to show that block diagram again. So if you want your desired response in the case of images to be dog images, then your XN should have a dog images plus some other image components. Otherwise, XN will be totally uncorrelated with the DN. Then the filter will not work, because the cross correlation of X and D in the absence of the proper thing that we are looking for will be 0. Then your weight vector will be 0. So we expect this XN and DN to have some correlation, some relationship between each other. If there's no relationship, you cannot expect that just by feeding any desired response, your filter would give a magical output. Okay, so that's the idea which we can infer from that equation RW equal to P. Okay, so keep remembering this expression RW is equal to P. Very simple, just like, rest in peace, RIP. Similar to that, I want you to just memorize this, and I don't want you to forget in your lifetime that RW equal to P allows you to design an adaptive system where the adaptive system will have its weight or filter coefficients W, which is nothing but R inverse P, and they're basically dependent on autocorrelation value of the signal and the cross correlation value of the input signal with the desired response. Okay, very easy to remember and very, very superb and elegant formula. Now, in most applications, we might be able to get the weight vector by using this process, but you can imagine there is one very complicated topic here is the R inverse, inverting the matrix. And the size of the R matrix is M by M matrix, where M is the size filter coefficients or the order of the system. So if M is, for example, order to some extent 6 or 7, then you have a 7 by 7 matrix. Inverting a 7 by 7 matrix would be okay with some software. Obviously, with our human capacity through handwritten matrix inversion, it's very difficult for us to proceed more than order 3. In other words, we cannot do easily inversion of matrix beyond 3 by 3. So R inverse, though, in spite of the availability of computational tools, it's not the most efficient way, especially when the order M tends to be high. And in many biomedical application, M is around 10 plus, okay? It can vary from 10 to 20, okay? So that brings difficulties in real world practical implementation is how do we invert those matrix, okay? So matrix inversion may not be that easy, okay? So that's one problem. So matrix inversion may not be easy, okay? The second problem is that this autocorrelation function matrix, which is R, which we talked, also has a time varying behavior. Okay, so when your autocorrelation itself is time varying, in other words, I compute the autocorrelation today for ECG signals. I compute the autocorrelation of the ECG signals from the same person tomorrow. They tend to have a change. When the autocorrelation varies with time, we have a statistical word for that. It's called non-stationary process. So a non-stationary process is where your second order statistics like autocorrelation and also the mean, the first order statistics change with time. So ideally what happens is that most of the biomedical signals behave in a non-stationary way, okay? And my intention is not to cover non-stationary techniques here because we can overcome non-stationary techniques by breaking the process into chunks, into small segments by using similar to what you've seen before windowing function. And we will be processing on those smaller chunks, which tend to have a quasi-stationary or an almost stationary behavior, okay? So just to give you an idea, in practicality, when the process is non-stationary, then the autocorrelation matrix that we talked here also becomes a function of time. It varies with time. It means you have to keep adapting your autocorrelation matrix as you go by. So that's a big challenge in non-stationary process, okay? So that's something also to keep in mind. Then also, many times, even if you manage to invert the R matrix, the numerical values that you get tends to be very highly sensitive, and you cannot do any approximation, no rounding of operation or no quantization operation. So numerical implementation of those in real world filters becomes a challenge, okay? So yes, we liked that formula that we got. It's called the Wiener-Hopf or the normal equation. RWP is also known as a normal equation or Wiener-Hopf equation. Two interchangeable terms is called normal equation or Wiener-Hopf equation. So RWP is a well-known equation, does a great job in getting the adaptive filter coefficients, but it might have practical aspects which might really, discourage us from doing it in real-world implementation. Are there ways to get around? Obviously, we can find other ways to overcome the matrix inversion. And one such popular technique on algorithm that I'm going to cover would allow us to do what we just saw, that finding W in a very, very elegant way. Okay, so how do we do this? It's through the process of optimization, or we call search method, because the whole thing that we are looking is in this minimum point. This minimum point is where your optimal filter coefficients or optimal weights. This is where we call optimal filter or weight vector, tap weight vector. So this is what we are searching for, and we did previously that by using the mean squared error operation, and we took the derivative, and we know when we take the derivative of that, we will encounter the minima because the surface was convex. Okay, so is there an algorithm that can do that? Obviously, we can design an algorithm. Maybe, for example, you might start somewhere here. I will use maybe a different color, green color. You might start your algorithm at some point here. This point obviously is not the optimal, it's not the red point in the curve. When you start here, your error function will be very high. Okay, now you would be controlling the error function in such a way that you're going to descend on this surface in a way that you're taking some step size and you're coming down. So in the next iteration, you're coming to this second point. Third iteration, you're coming to this point. Fourth iteration here, and in fifth iteration, you would be reaching the minimal point. So it's a descent algorithm. And if you remember, we called this point of minimum, the differentiation becomes gradient and the descent. So it's also called the gradient descent algorithm. So a gradient descent is a way to approach algorithmically the solution for finding the optimal filter coefficients W. So here you see the green guys in 5 iterations, starting from an initial condition, have reached that minimum point. Okay. Now, obviously, you can take smaller step size. Maybe instead of taking the step size like what I've shown, you can take a smaller step size like in between points. Again, you're guaranteed to reach the minimum point, but you have to note that because taking smaller step size will take a longer time for the algorithm to converge. Okay, so now you're getting an idea. There's something called step size in the gradient descent. Okay. On the other hand, if you were to be quite anxious and you want to do things very fast, you would have taken these blue steps. For example, let me start here on the other side here. Blue steps, and you're taking a large step size. Instead of taking small, you're taking large step size along the optimization curve. And I'm going the second iteration, I'm reaching here. The third iteration, I might go here. Okay. So what has happened with the large step size is that, yes, it might reach the minimum point fast, but you might be unlucky in missing the right point because I've taken a large step size, and in this process, the second iteration, I have missed the minimum point, and I'm going somewhere in the optimization surface, which is not optimal. Okay, so that's where the big trade-off is. That now, what would be the optimal step size in ensuring you reach this red point, and you also reach it in a faster way. Okay, so that's where the design of the algorithm comes into play. And all here in the gradient descent we mentioned is to get the concept of what's called a step size. Okay, so if we know how to go around the error performance curve by taking appropriate step size, then you might be designing your optimal filter coefficients W. Also, another thing I want to point out is that this particular diagram is a simplified diagram. Normally, this W is a vector. Okay, so we know W, we have M of those coefficients. So this surface would be an M-dimensional bowl. Okay, it's an M-dimensional surface with convexity. Okay, so it's a hyperplane. So this example I took was simple one weight vector, but we'll have M of those, and we'll have a performance index which is controlling the M. So that's why in the gradient descent technique, when we took the differentiation operation, we took the partial differentiation with respect to each of the weight vectors W. So you have to just imagine this would be a hyper paraboloid surface and it would be an m-dimensional surface that we are optimizing. Okay, so just for sake of simplicity, I showed one W, but this W is in real world, it's a vector, W vector. Okay. So what is that algorithm called where we take the step size and reach that minimum that we're looking for? Is a very simple algorithm called least mean squares algorithm, or LMS technique. Okay, least mean square algorithm. Least mean squared algorithm was developed independently for both signal processing and also in developing machine learning models. So whatever I said here also applies in developing a machine learning module, which is totally a computer science concept. The way we see in signal processing, the least mean square, it's not necessarily a learning concept. It is also a concept where we have W weights, and we know W's are filter coefficients. And once you know W are filter coefficients, you know how to really program them in hardware also. Like we have seen the filter realizations, whatever you have seen before comes in all handy. And all these filter designs so far we have been talking or some form of an FIR filter design, finite impulse response filter design. Okay, so what is the LMS algorithm here? LMS algorithm is just a simple, I would say 4 key steps are involved, and I've shown the steps here, the 6 steps, but there are 4 key steps. So initial is that when we start the algorithm, we essentially start with the weight vectors are all been given zeros. Okay, so we initialize it to 0. So the moment we start receiving the sequence, the signal input sequence, we are receiving into the adaptive filter. And for each of those input time sample, we will compute the output of the filter, yn, which is equal to an estimate of the desired response. So estimate is there is a hat symbol here. Estimate of the desired response, yn, is nothing but your weight vector multiplied by the input vector xn. Okay, we have seen that before. Okay, now as we did before, we compute the error function. In step 3, error is nothing but the desired response minus the output of the filter. And step 4 is what determines your LMS algorithm. So your current filter coefficients, W vector, current filter coefficients, by the way, these are size m by 1, is nothing but your previous iteration. You see the iteration was n, whereas here it's n plus 1, plus this factor, plus mu times error times the input signal vector. Okay, now what is mu? Mu is playing the role of step size. Okay, so this is simple weight vector update. So initially, for example, if you take n equal to 1, for example, when n equal to 1, it will have W0, which was all 0 vector, plus this factor that gets added up where mu is the step size, and en is the error that we got in step 3, and xn is the input weight vector. So your current sample and the previous samples are an m by 1 input vector. So essentially, it's a very simple additive term. And as we go along this process, the moment we repeat this process, obviously steps 2 to 4 is repeated until you exhaust all the samples, or until a point you find this weight vector is not getting updated anymore, which means your filter is converged. Which means when your weight vector will not update more is that when your error is 0. Okay, so when this error is 0 or almost 0, when en becomes almost 0, you would see that this factor is not helping in updating the weight vector, and error becomes almost equal to 0 when your desired response is almost equal to y of n. Okay, so or y of n is almost equal to d of n. Let's put it that way. Y of n is equal to d of n. Okay, so that's where we say that your filter has learned the desired response, and you have reached that point, and your filter coefficients are converged. So the simple LMS algorithm allows us to also find as the weight vector W without inverting the matrix, without matrix inversion, just by algorithmically. So previously we had the issue of RW equal to P through the normal equation. Inversion of matrix was seen as a complicated problem. Here, by taking this technique, as long as you know what's the desired response, you assume the weight vector to be 0, you go through this process, and mu step size selection plays an important role. Sometimes people select a higher mu to make the algorithm converge fast, But what will happen, as we just pointed out, that a larger step size might miss the minimum point, and you will see that the W's are taking some random values. It means your filter hasn't converged. Mu small step size will essentially guarantee you that you're reaching the optimal W, just like how we saw in the performance curve before. But the only thing is that it will take a long time to reach that filter coefficients. How would we select an optimal mu step size? There are various variations to LMS technique, which essentially plays around how to select the mu. So this is an example of the green plot showing a small step size, and the blue showing the large step size. Now, how would we take an optimal mu? Now, this particular example we showed, mu was just a constant which you predetermine, and for safe designers, we select mu to be small value. But there are other variations of the LMS algorithm just around step 4 that I showed you. You can't do any other variations. You can just play around with step 4. And even if you're interested, you could design your own variation to step 4. And there you go. You have a version of a least mean square algorithm, which can be used for adaptive filtering as well as for learning applications in machine learning. So what I'm showing you is that 5 different variations of the LMS algorithm, basically how they've changed the different ways to show the mu. So here what they've done is that this is a standard one we just saw. In the second example, you could see that the mu function has been changed a little bit to basically include a very small error term, e greater than 1, and that's just the normalized LMS. In the third example, they're just playing around with the sign of the error function and not doing much to anything else in the equation. And in the fourth example, they're taking the sign of the input signal rather than the sign of the error. So they call this a sign data LMS. The previous one called sign error LMS. Then they also apply some leakage factor. Basically, they apply a leakage factor 1 minus mu to the tap weight vector. They call tap leakage LMS. So these are other modifications to the least mean square step 4. And there are also work that where the mu has been adapted to the signal. Okay, adapted to the signal, and I didn't provide that equation here. In other words, mu, instead of being kept as a constant, they found out that if mu equal to 1 by 1 plus the current signal square is one optimal value. Okay, current value of signal squared. So this seems to be one value. The reason they put 1 plus is to make sure whenever the x is 0, this mu doesn't blow up. Okay, so this is one way where the mu has been made adaptive. It's not a constant anymore. So those are just different simple variations for LMS. And as I said, you have a lot of other options also to change the LMS algorithm. But eventually you got to make sure whatever you do, that the technique is providing optimal W, which means the convergence have reached, and you don't have to be too concerned about other ways to optimize your problem, like whether you need to work on a different model order or whether the desired response had some correlation with the signal. You don't have to worry if you've selected the right mu and the right convergences happen. If nothing works out, then obviously we need to investigate the other aspects of this adaptive filter design. Okay, so with that being said, I also have an example that's given in the notes. So you can go through this simple example where we have taken a signal and a signal was added to a noise. How do we go about in finding the optimal adaptive filter coefficients W? Few key steps involved. In all those steps, essentially it involves a calculation of the autocorrelation function and taking the inverse of the matrix here. Here I was okay with the example to take the inverse because the matrix that you had was 2 by 2. In other words, the order of the filter was 2. Okay, but we know in practical application order is high. Then we have to use something like an LMS algorithm. It's difficult to give a problem set with the LMS algorithm because it's an implementation on the computer rather than something that we can work out by hand. Okay, so I will stop here because this is a very key topic where the filtering has happened pretty differently compared to what we have seen before. Now, in the subsequent sessions, I will expand on this thing by taking some very practical application. The very first practical application we will take of this filtering concept is in removing the fetal ECG, in monitoring the fetal ECG, how to remove the mother's ECG. Okay, when the baby is in the mother's womb, typically the mother's ECG acts as an interference. Now you see, it's not a noise anymore. It's one physiological signal interfering with another physiological signal. In this case, it happens the baby's physiological ECG has overlap with mother's ECG when the pregnancy is going on. So now, how do we remove the mother's ECG so that we can monitor the heart rate of the baby? For this kind of a problem, any of the filtering we have seen before will not come in handy. We have to use an adaptive filter like how we discussed today. Okay, thank you for your attention.